Do you want to make a gulag for your maps just like this? Watch until the end to find out how. I'm just going to show you how to make a gulag for your map. If you want to see how to make a Boxfight or Zonewars map, press either the video on the top right or top left of your screen now. For this example, I'll be using a Zonewars map. First, make sure all your player spawners in your map have the settings visible in game to no and enabled during phase to pre-game only. Then, go to your My Island settings and under mode, change the spawn limit to 2. The reason for this is that if it's at 1, players won't be able to respawn in the gulag. Next, go to where you've created your gulag and we're going to create the spawning and waiting/spectating area first. I would recommend having this part a floor above the fighting area just like I have. If you want to build a gulag without having to build it from scratch, I would recommend using the prison prefab. This is what I've done and just changed some things around. Now to start off, make a clear section like I have, a floor up from where you want players to fight, which will be used as the spectating/waiting area. Now place down a spawn pad with the settings enabled during phase to gameplay only, priority group 1, users island start no, and visible during game to no. Then copy the spawn pad and paste it beside it, and in the events, put on player spawned send event to both of these spawn pads to disable. Make sure you do this in both of the spawn pads you've just placed. Now, select and copy both of these spawn pads and bring them over to the other side of your gulag waiting area and place them down. Just change on player spawned to the 2 spawn pads on the side in the functions, and remember you need to do it for both of them. Next, place down the mutator zone device, making sure it covers both spawn pads, and copy these settings. Enable on phase, none, zone width/depth, whatever you need to be able to cover both of the spawn pads, affix creatures, no, affix guards, no, and enable VFX, disabled. Then go to functions and put enable when receiving from the 2 spawn pads that it's covering on player spawned, as well as disable when receiving from itself, which is mutator zone device, on player exiting zone. Now copy this mutator zone device and paste it on the other side, and just change the function to the other 2 spawn pads that this mutator zone device is covering, and to disable when receiving from itself. Now to start making the fighting area, get a teleporter device and place it down where you want players to fight. Go into the settings and set the group and the target group to none, teleporter rift visible, play visual effects, play sound effects, and converse momentum all to off, then face player and teleporter direction to yes. You can control where the player is facing from the line coming out of the teleporter. Then you want to go across to functions and put teleport when receiving from mutator zone device on player entering zone. Then copy and paste this teleporter onto the other side of your gulag arena where you want the other player to spawn, and just change teleport when receiving from to the other mutator zone device. Next up, grab a trigger device and place it down outside of your map and open up the settings and put visible in game to off, triggered by vehicles and water to off, and then also VFX and SFX to off. Then go to functions and put trigger when receiving from teleporter on teleported. Then press OK and copy and paste this trigger again and open up the settings, and just like we did with the teleporter, just change to trigger when receiving from the second teleporter. Next, place down one more trigger, but this time we're going to change a few settings. In this one, have visible in game to off, trigger by vehicles and water to off, trigger delay to 3 seconds, trigger VFX and SFX off, and transmit every X triggers to 2. In this triggers functions, just have trigger when receiving from the other 2 triggers on trigger. So there should be 2 separate ones that say trigger when receiving from trigger 1, and then trigger when receiving from trigger 2, and both of them will be on triggered. These triggers is what's going to start the 1v1 only when there's 2 players both there and ready to fight. Next up, grab a barrier device, which will be used to keep players in their spawn until there is another player in the gulag that's ready. So, place down a barrier device a floor or 2 in front of a teleporter and change barrier material to translucent and the height, depth and width to whatever you need to cover the whole section that you're blocking off in front of the teleporter. And in functions, have disable when receiving from trigger 3 on triggered. Then copy this barrier to the other side and paste it down. There is no need to change any other settings. I would also recommend to place an invisible barrier device on top of the arena so no player can leave out the top. As well as this, I've placed mutator zone devices throughout the spectating area with the settings allow editing, no, enable VFX, disabled, allow weapon fire, off, and allow building, off. The reason I've placed these is so that no players can be killed by another player while they're waiting for the fight that's currently happening in the Gulag to be finished. Now, to make the winner of the Gulag spawn back into the game, grab a player reference device and open up the settings, then set visible in game to off, stat to track to eliminations, and play audio to off. Then go to functions and put register player when receiving from teleporter on teleported. Then go to events and put on track stat changed, send event to barrier device 1, enable player reference, which is itself, to clear player, and I only have barrier device 4 to enable because I have two barriers on the same side. You don't need this. Then copy this player reference device and change everything in the functions and events to the second version of the same device. What I mean by this is that in functions you'd put register player when receiving from teleporter 2 on teleported, and in events you'd put on track stat changed, send event to barrier device 2, enable, as well as player reference 2, which is itself, to clear player. Now, to make the player that has won the Gulag get sent back into the game, grab another teleporter device, but before we do that, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment on what tutorial you want next, and place it down wherever you want players to spawn back into your map, with the settings teleporter group and target group to none, teleporter rift visible, play visual effects, play sound effects, and converse momentum all to off. Then, face player and teleporter direction, yes. You can control this by the line coming out of the teleporter. Then, in functions, put teleport to when receiving from both player reference devices on track stat changed. And in events, put on teleported, send event to all 4 spectating spawn pads to enable. But if you're putting this in a Zonewars map or something like that and want players to skydive in, copy the same settings but also include skydive after teleport to yes, and then just put this teleporter up high in the sky. Now, if you want players to have different weapons in the Gulag than they do to when they're playing in the normal map, and then you want their weapons to return back to normal once they leave the Gulag, place down an item granted device and drop the items you want the players to have in the Gulag into it. For me, it's a deagle, pump, and a pistol. Then open up the settings and change grant to all items, and you can add spare weapon ammo if you want. I have, mine's 80, and then cycle behavior to wrap. Then scroll across to functions and in grant item when receiving from, put it to teleporter on teleported. Then restock items when receiving from item granter, which is itself on item granted. Then copy this item granter and in functions just change the grant item to the other teleporter and restock items to the other item granter, which is itself. Now, to return all the normal items back to a player if they win the Gulag, and once they're spawned back into the game, place down a new item granter and change the settings to grant all items, cycle behavior, wrap, ownership of dropped item to all. Also make sure grant action is set to clear inventory. Then scroll across to functions and put grant item when receiving from teleporter 3 on teleported. And then also restock items when receiving from item granter 3, which is itself on item granted. Lastly, if you have a storm in your map and don't want it in the Gulag, place a basic storm controller device over your Gulag and have these settings. Generate storm on game start, no. Initial radius, whatever you need to cover your whole Gulag, minus 40 meters. Final radius, the same as your initial radius. Wait time, 20 minutes, which is the max. Resize time, 10 minutes, which is the max. Damage level, none. And move time, 5 minutes. Then, in functions, put generate storm when receiving from a timer device that you should have in your map. This is the one that drops barriers, and make sure this is on success. Do the same thing if you have a box fight map. If you're confused what timer devices I'm talking about, press one of the videos in either the top right or top left of your screen to find out how to make a box fights map and a Zonewars map. And that's how you make a Gulag in Fortnite Creative. If this video helped, press the video on screen now to see how to make a Zonewars map to add this to.